The brass numbers on the weathered courthouse door read like a countdown: 28, 29, 30. Emma Hartley's hand trembled as she pushed open the heavy oak door to Office 31, where the future of her impulsive decision waited behind stacks of yellowed property records. In 3 hours, a condemned homestead nobody wanted would either become her greatest triumph or her most spectacular failure. What she didn't know was that hidden within those crumbling walls lay a secret that would bring a senator's motorcade, racing through the quiet streets of Millbrook Valley, and change everything she thought she knew about her own identity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog clung to Millbrook Valley like a silk shroud, muffling the sounds of Emma's rental car as it navigated the winding mountain road. She had driven through the night from Portland, fueled by instant coffee and the kind of determination that comes from making a decision everyone thinks is crazy. The GPS on her dashboard kept losing signal, forcing her to rely on handwritten directions from the real estate agent who'd seemed genuinely surprised anyone had responded to the listing. "You can't miss it," Harold Finch had told her over the phone, his voice crackling through poor reception. "The Hartwell place sits at the end of Maple Grove Road, been empty for 37 years. Nobody local will touch it." When she'd asked why, he'd simply said, "Some properties have too much history, Miss Hartley. Too many ghosts." Emma had laughed it off then. Growing up in foster homes had taught her that ghosts were usually just shadows of the past that needed understanding, not fear. Besides, at 34, she was ready for something more than her tiny apartment above the Vietnamese restaurant in Portland. The teaching salary at Jefferson Elementary barely covered rent in the city. When she'd seen the listing for the Hartwell estate, 23 acres with a condemned Victorian homestead for less than her annual salary, something had stirred in her chest. Not quite hope, but close enough. The fog began to lift as she turned onto Maple Grove Road, revealing the first glimpses of autumn's artwork. Sugar maples blazed orange and red against the morning sky, their leaves falling like drops of flame onto the neglected asphalt. The road narrowed, then turned to gravel, then became little more than 2 ruts carved through encroaching wilderness. Emma's sedan protested with every pothole, but she pressed forward, drawn by something she couldn't name. When the house finally emerged from behind a curtain of overgrown lilacs, Emma brought the car to a stop and simply stared. The photographs hadn't done justice to either its grandeur or its decay. 3 stories of Victorian ambition rose against the sky, complete with turrets, gabled windows, and elaborate gingerbread trim that hung like wooden lace from every eave. But time had not been kind. The wraparound porch sagged dramatically on one side. Several windows were boarded up, and the roof showed gaps where shingles had surrendered to decades of Vermont winters. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching on frost-stiffened grass. The air smelled of wood smoke and dying leaves, with an underlying sweetness she couldn't identify. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered against a tree, the sound echoing through the valley like a wooden bell. "Well," Emma said to the house, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air, "we're both a bit of a fixer-upper, aren't we?" The front steps groaned under her weight, and she tested each board before trusting it completely. The key Harold had mailed her was an ornate brass thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. It turned in the lock with surprising ease, and the front door swung open with a sound straight from a horror movie. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of morning light that penetrated the gaps in the boarded windows. The entrance hall stretched before her, dominated by a grand staircase that curved upward like a question mark. Faded wallpaper, probably silk. From the pattern, peeled from the walls in graceful strips. The floorboards were scarred but solid, made from wood that didn't exist in modern construction. Emma moved through the rooms like an archaeologist, each space revealing layers of history, The formal parlor still held furniture draped in sheets that disintegrated at her touch. In what must have been the library, empty shelves reached from floor to ceiling, their contents long since removed or destroyed. The kitchen, with its massive iron stove and soapstone sink, looked like it had been frozen in time. But it was the study that stopped her in her tracks. Unlike the other rooms, this one seemed almost preserved. A heavy desk dominated the space, its surface covered in papers that crumbled when she tried to read them. The walls were lined with portraits, their subjects staring down at her with eyes that seemed familiar in an unsettling way. One painting, in particular, drew her attention. A woman in Victorian dress with auburn hair, the exact shade as Emma's own, holding a baby and standing beside a distinguished-looking man with kind eyes. Emma reached up to touch the frame and felt something give way beneath her fingers. A small panel in the wall clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow but intact. The first entry was dated September 15th, 1889. "The Underground Railroad may have officially ended," she read aloud, her voice disturbing the silence. "But the work continues. James and I have decided to use the estate as a sanctuary for those still seeking freedom from different kinds of bondage. The hidden rooms in the cellar have been expanded, and the tunnel to the old mill is complete. May God forgive us for the laws we break in service of a higher law." Emma's heart raced as she flipped through the pages. The journal detailed the secret work of James and Margaret Hartwell, using their wealth and position to help escaped slaves. Long after the Civil War, and later immigrants and others fleeing persecution. There were maps, coded messages, and lists of names, hundreds of people who had found sanctuary within these walls. She was so absorbed in the journal that she almost missed the sound of car engines approaching. Multiple vehicles from the sound of it. Emma moved to a front window and peered through a gap in the boards. A convoy of black SUVs was making its way up the neglected road, led by a vehicle with government plates. Her mind raced. She'd filed all the paperwork properly, paid the required deposits. The property was legally hers as of yesterday afternoon. So why was someone official from the look of it, coming to the Hartwell place? The lead vehicle stopped in front of the house, and Emma watched as several people emerged, men in dark suits who looked like security detail, and then an older man with silver hair and a bearing that suggested authority. Even from a distance, something about him seemed familiar. She hastily closed the journal and tucked it under her arm before making her way to the front door. By the time she opened it, the silver-haired man was already on the porch, flanked by his security detail. Up close, she could see he was in his 70s, with intense blue eyes and a face that had graced numerous newspaper headlines. "Miss Hartley?" he asked, his voice carrying the polished tones of a lifetime in politics. "I'm Senator William Thornfield. I apologize for the intrusion, but I understand you've recently purchased this property." Emma straightened, clutching the journal tighter. "Yesterday afternoon. All the paperwork is in order, Senator. I'm not sure why." "May I come in?" he interrupted gently. "What I have to discuss is rather personal." Against her better judgment, Emma stepped aside. The senator entered, his security detail remaining on the porch. He moved through the entrance hall with the familiarity of someone who had been there before, his gaze taking in the decay with what looked like genuine sadness. "I haven't been inside this house in over 40 years, he said quietly. "Not since the fire of 1952 destroyed the town records, and my mother thought it best to distance ourselves from certain aspects of our history." "Your history?" Emma asked, confusion evident in her voice. The senator turned to face her, and in the dusty light filtering through the broken boards, she saw it. The same intense eyes as the man in the portrait, the same strong jaw, the same way of holding his shoulders. "This house belonged to my great-grandparents, James and Margaret Hartwell," he said simply, although the family name was changed to Thornfield in 1953 for political reasons. He paused, studying her face with an expression she couldn't read. "But what's more interesting is that you, Miss Hartley, bear a striking resemblance to Margaret Hartwell, and unless I'm very much mistaken, you're holding her journal." Emma's grip on the leather-bound book tightened. "I found it just now. There was a hidden compartment." "Behind the third portrait from the left," the senator finished. "Yes, I know. My mother showed it to me once when I was young before. She decided the family's past was too controversial for a political career." He moved closer to the portrait of Margaret and the baby. "That child in the painting, that was my grandmother, Eleanor. But what most people don't know is that Margaret and James had another daughter, one who doesn't appear in any official family records." Emma felt the floor shift beneath her feet, though she knew it hadn't moved. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that sometimes the past has a way of correcting historical omissions." The senator's voice was gentle now. "Your name, Hartley. It's not a coincidence, is it? Were you adopted?" The word hung in the air between them, like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Emma nodded slowly, her throat tight. "When I was 3, I don't know anything about my birth parents. The records were sealed." Senator Thornfield reached into his jacket and withdrew a faded photograph. He handed it to Emma with careful reverence. The image showed a young woman standing in front of the very house they were in now, holding a baby. The woman's face was partially obscured, but her hair, that distinctive auburn shade, was unmistakable. "This photograph was in my mother's effects when she passed," he explained. "On the back it simply says Rose Hartwell and baby Emma, 1990. Rose was my cousin, though the family refused to acknowledge her because she was born to Margaret and James's secret daughter, the one they helped escape an abusive situation and whose existence they kept hidden to protect her." Emma stared at the photograph, her hands trembling. The baby in the image was wearing a tiny bracelet, the same bracelet she'd worn until she was 5, when it finally became too small. She still had it in her jewelry box in Portland. Rose was troubled, the senator continued carefully. "She struggled with addiction and other challenges. When she had you, she knew she couldn't provide the life you deserved. So she made the hardest decision a mother can make. She gave you up for adoption and then disappeared. We lost track of her after that." Tears blurred Emma's vision as she looked around the decaying room with new eyes. This wasn't just a house she'd bought on impulse. This was her history, her blood, her story written in wood and stone. "Why did you come here today?" she managed to ask. The senator's expression grew complex, mixing regret with something like hope. "The sale of this property triggered alerts I had placed years ago. I've been searching for any trace of Rose or her child for decades when I saw the buyer's name was E. Hartley, and the agent mentioned you were a young woman from Portland." He spread his hands. "I had to know." Emma sank onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, overwhelmed. The journal lay beside her, its secrets suddenly personal in a way she couldn't have imagined. "So, you're what? My cousin? Second cousin?" Something like that," Senator Thornfield said with a small smile. "Family trees get complicated when people try to prune branches they find inconvenient." He glanced around the room again. "You know, there's more to this house than just family. History. The work James and Margaret did here. The people they helped. It's a legacy worth preserving." "I read some of the journal," Emma admitted. "The Underground Railroad, the sanctuary work." "It went beyond that," the senator said, taking a seat on a sheet-covered chair that groaned under his weight. This house was a beacon for anyone who needed help, regardless of the law or social convention. James was a judge who believed justice and law weren't always the same thing. Margaret was a suffragette who thought freedom belonged to everyone, not just those society deemed worthy. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. That's why the family distanced themselves after the fire in '52. My grandfather was starting his political career, and having abolitionists and radicals in the family tree was considered a liability. They changed the name to Thornfield, moved to Burlington, and tried to bury the past. But you didn't forget, Emma observed. My mother made sure of that, even as she publicly distanced herself from it. On her deathbed, she made me promise to find Rose's child if they were still alive, to make sure the true history wasn't lost forever. He gestured to the house around them. When I learned you'd bought this place, it seemed like providence. Emma stood up, moving to the window where dusty light filtered through the gaps. Outside, the convoy of black vehicles looked surreal against the overgrown landscape. What happens now? That depends on you, the senator replied. This house, this land, it's yours legally, and, as it turns out, by birthright. But there are complications. Emma turned back to face him. What kind of complications? The senator's expression grew serious. I've spent the last 15 years working on legislation to protect historical sites like this one. Places that represent the untold stories of American history. But there's a development group that's been buying up land in Millbrook Valley. They want to turn it into a resort community for wealthy retirees. This property is key to their plans because of the natural springs on the eastern boundary. Natural springs? Some of the purest water in New England. James and Margaret used them as part of their sanctuary. Clean water was crucial for the people they hid. Now that same water is worth millions to developers who want to bottle it and sell it as artisanal mountain spring water. Emma felt a flash of anger. They can't have it. I just bought this place. Legally, no, but they have ways of making life difficult for property owners who don't cooperate, especially when that owner is a school teacher from Portland with limited resources. The senator stood up, brushing dust from his impeccable suit, which is why I'm here with a proposition. Emma crossed her arms, suddenly wary. What kind of proposition? Let me help you restore this place, not as a senator, but as family, as someone who wants to see the Hartwell legacy preserved correctly this time. In exchange, you allow me to include the property in the Historical Sanctuary Act I'm sponsoring. It would protect the land from development permanently while providing federal funds for restoration. And what's in it for you? Emma asked, her years of navigating foster care having taught her that nothing came without a price. The senator's smile was sad. Redemption, perhaps. A chance to correct my family's mistake in trying to erase this history. And he hesitated, showing the first vulnerability she'd seen from him. A chance to reconnect with the only family I have left. My wife passed 5 years ago. We had no children. The Thornfield line ends with me, but the Hartwell line, the true line, continues with you. Emma felt the weight of history pressing down on her, heavier than the condemned house's failing beams. She looked at the journal, still lying on the stairs, at the portrait of Margaret Hartwell with her knowing eyes, at the senator who was offering her more than just financial help. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. The senator reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. This has my personal number, not the office line, my actual phone. Call me when you're ready to talk more. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Emma, whatever you decide about my offer, be careful. The development group I mentioned, Pinnacle Enterprises, they don't take no for an answer easily. They've been known to use pressure tactics. After the convoy left, Emma stood alone in the dusty entrance hall, her mind reeling. She'd come to Vermont looking for a fresh start, a place to call her own. Instead, she'd found a family history she never knew existed, a legacy of courage and compassion, and a fight she hadn't anticipated. She picked up Margaret's journal and climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. In what must have been the master bedroom, she found a window seat overlooking the valley. The fog had burned off completely now, revealing the breathtaking sweep of mountains painted in autumn colors. Somewhere out there, developers were planning to turn this pristine landscape into a playground for the wealthy. Emma opened the journal to a random page and began to read. Today, we helped the Morrison family reach safety. They had escaped from a factory in Massachusetts, where children as young as 8 were forced to work 14-hour days. James says the law allows it, but I say any law that permits such cruelty is no law at all. The hidden room in the cellar now holds 7 souls, seeking a better life. Margaret Hartwell, June 3rd, 1891. Emma closed the journal and held it to her chest. She thought about her students in Portland, how she'd always taught them that one person could make a difference. She thought about all the foster homes she'd lived in, never knowing where she came from or who her people were. She thought about Margaret Hartwell defying unjust laws to help strangers find freedom. Her phone buzzed, startling her from her reverie. It was a text from Harold Finch, the real estate agent. Hope you're settling in. Forgot to mention, watch out for Pinnacle Enterprises. They've been sniffing around. They might contact you with an offer. Just thought you should know. Emma looked out at the valley again, then at the journal in her hands. She didn't know what the coming days would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She was home, not just in a physical sense, but in a deeper way. She was connected to this place, to these walls that had sheltered so many, to the legacy of people who chose compassion over comfort. Tomorrow she would call the senator. Tomorrow she would begin learning about her family's history and the fight to preserve it. Tomorrow she would start the long process of bringing the Hartwell house back to life. But today she would simply sit in the window seat of her ancestral home and read Margaret's journal, discovering page by page the remarkable woman whose blood flowed in her veins and whose courage had helped shape the very concept of sanctuary in America. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Emma felt something shift inside her. The rootlessness that had defined her life, the sense of being untethered that came from growing up without family history, began to ease. She was no longer just Emma Hartley, orphan and schoolteacher. She was Emma Hartley, descendant of James and Margaret Hartwell, inheritor of a legacy of compassion and courage. And that, she realized, changed everything. The first threat came, disguised as opportunity. 3 days after Senator Thornfield's visit, Emma was pulling rotted boards from the porch when a pristine silver Mercedes navigated the rutted driveway. She straightened, wiping her hands on her work clothes, as a man in an expensive suit emerged, picking his way across the overgrown lawn with obvious distaste. "Miss Hartley?" He extended a manicured hand. "Robert Ashford, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions for Pinnacle Enterprises. I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but we've been trying to reach you." Emma shook his hand warily. She'd ignored several voicemails from unfamiliar numbers since the senator's warning. "I've been busy." Ashford's smile never wavered as he surveyed the dilapidated house. "I can see that. Quite an undertaking for one person, which is precisely why I'm here." He produced a leather portfolio from his briefcase. "Pinnacle Enterprises would like to make you an offer, a very generous offer. The property's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price, Miss Hartley. We're prepared to offer you 5 times what you paid, cash. You could buy a beautiful home in Portland, perhaps upgrade from that apartment above the restaurant." Emma's skin prickled. How did he know where she lived? You've done your research. We're thorough. It's why we're successful. Ashford opened the portfolio, revealing official-looking documents. $2 million, Miss Hartley. That's life-changing money for a teacher. You could pay off your student loans, help your former foster siblings with their struggles. Particularly, young David, rehab facilities are expensive, aren't they? The blood drained from Emma's face. David had entered treatment just last month. Only a handful of people knew about it. How could you possibly? We believe in understanding our potential partners completely. Ashford's tone remained pleasant, but something darker lurked beneath. We know this is more money than you've ever imagined having. We know the challenges your foster siblings face. We know about the foundation you've been trying to establish for at-risk youth. Think what you could do with $2 million. Emma stepped back, her hands clenched. Get off my property. Miss Hartley, please be reasonable. This house is condemned. The restoration costs alone will bankrupt you. The property taxes on 23 acres. Did you factor those into your budget? The insurance? The environmental assessments required before any major work can begin? I said leave. Ashford's smile finally faltered. You're making a mistake. This offer won't remain on the table indefinitely. And Pinnacle Enterprises has considerable influence in Vermont. Permits can be delayed, inspections can find problems, contractors can become unavailable. Is that a threat? It's reality. He closed the portfolio with a snap. You're out of your depth here. This isn't some feel-good teacher movie where determination conquers all. This is business, big business, and you're standing in our way. Emma straightened to her full height. My ancestors stood up to worse than corporate bullies. This house has sheltered people fleeing from those who thought money and power gave them the right to destroy lives. I'm not selling. Ashford's expression hardened. Your ancestors. Yes, we know about Senator Thornfield's visit, his little historical preservation scheme. Do you really think that washed-up politician can protect you? His influence isn't what it once was. The development of Millbrook Valley is inevitable. You can profit from it or be crushed by it. The choice is yours. He turned to leave, then paused. By the way, I'd be careful with that old wiring. Condemned houses are terribly prone to fires, especially ones filled with so much history. His gaze lingered on the house meaningfully. Accidents happen all the time in these old places. After his Mercedes disappeared down the drive, Emma's hands shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed the number on Senator Thornfield's card. They threatened me, she said without preamble when he answered. Pinnacle Enterprises. They know things about my life, about my foster siblings. They implied the house might have an accident. Where are you now? The senator's voice was sharp with concern. Still at the house. I've been camping here while I work on emergency repairs. Pack what you need for a few nights. I'm sending someone to pick you up. You can stay at my home in Burlington until we figure this out. I'm not running away from my own property. You're not running. You're regrouping. Pinnacle plays. Dirty. But they're not the only ones with resources. Trust me, Emma, please. 2 hours later, a black SUV arrived driven by Marcus Thornfield, the senator's nephew and aide. He was younger than Emma expected, with the same striking blue eyes as his uncle, but a more casual demeanor. You must be the long-lost cousin, he said, loading her bag into the vehicle. Uncle Bill's talked about nothing else for days. Do you know he's had a private investigator looking for you for almost 10 years? Emma climbed into the passenger seat. He mentioned searching for Rose's child. I didn't realize it had been that long. Family means everything to him, especially after Aunt Patricia died. Marcus navigated the country roads with practiced ease. He's called in every favor he has to fast-track the Historical Sanctuary Act. Pinnacle's going to find their usual. Tactics won't work this time. The drive to Burlington revealed Vermont's beauty beyond Millbrook Valley. Mountains rolled into the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Marcus proved to be easy company, sharing stories about growing up in the Thornfield political dynasty while asking thoughtful questions about Emma's life. "It must be strange," he said as they entered Burlington's outskirts. "Finding out you're connected to all this history. Strange doesn't begin to cover it. A week ago, I was grading spelling tests and planning a Halloween party for my students. Now I'm in a corporate thriller with family revelations and veiled threats." Marcus's expression darkened. Pinnacle's threats aren't always veiled. They destroyed a historic district in Montpellier last year through systematic harassment of property owners. Uncle Bill's been fighting them for years. The senator's home was a gracious Victorian in Burlington's historic hill section, impeccably maintained but welcoming rather than ostentatious. Senator Thornfield met them at the door, his concern evident. "I've already called the state police about the threats," he said, ushering Emma inside, "and I've got a security team checking your property. We're not taking any chances." The interior of the house mixed political memorabilia with family warmth. Photographs covered nearly every surface, campaigns, celebrations, and quieter moments that revealed a life devoted to public service and private affection. "Your room's upstairs," the senator said, leading the way. It was Patricia's study. She would have loved knowing family was using it again. The room was cozy and lined with books, with windows overlooking a garden gone dormant for winter. Emma set her bag down, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from isolation to protection. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "You barely know me." Senator Thornfield's expression softened. "Your family. And more than that, you represent a chance to right old wrongs. The Hartwell legacy shouldn't have been hidden away. Your great-great-grandparents would be appalled at how their descendants tried to bury their work." Over dinner, they strategized. The senator had already contacted preservation societies, environmental groups, and historical organizations. Support was building for protecting the Hartwell property, but Pinnacle's influence ran deep. "They've contributed to half the political campaigns in Vermont," Marcus explained, pouring wine, "including Mayor Bradley in Millbrook. That's why local permits and inspections could become problems. So we go around the local level," the senator said. "The Historical Sanctuary Act creates federal protection. Once it passes, Pinnacle can't touch the property, regardless of local politics." "When will it come to a vote?" Emma asked. "I'm pushing for next month, but Pinnacle knows this, which means they'll escalate their pressure tactics." The senator's expression was grave. "Are you prepared for that? They'll dig into every aspect of your life looking for leverage." Emma thought about her students, her foster siblings, the quiet life she'd built in Portland. Then she thought about Margaret Hartwell's journal, about all the people who had found sanctuary within those walls. "My great-great-grandmother harbored fugitive slaves when it could have meant prison. She hid immigrant families when the law said they should be deported. I think I can handle corporate intimidation." The senator smiled, spoken like a true Hartwell. Later that evening, Emma called her principal in Portland to request extended leave. "Family emergency," she explained, which wasn't entirely untrue. Her students would be disappointed, but the substitute teacher was excellent. She also called David at the treatment center. Her foster brother sounded tired, but hopeful. "Did someone from a company called Pinnacle contact you about me?" Her heart sank. "What did they say?" "They offered to pay for my entire treatment. If you'd speak with them about some property thing, I told them to stuff it, but..." "What's going on?" She explained as much as she could without worrying him. David, the closest thing she had to a brother before discovering her blood relations, listened with growing anger. "Those bastards! Using my recovery as leverage. Want me to come up there? I know some guys." "Stay in treatment, David. That's what matters. I've got help here. You sure? You've always tried to handle everything alone. Emma looked around the guest room, thought about the senator and Marcus downstairs planning her defense, about the security team protecting her property. I'm not alone anymore. The next morning brought troubling news. The security team reported signs of trespassing at the Hartwell property. Nothing was damaged, but someone had been inside the house. They're looking for something, the senator mused over breakfast. Did you find anything besides Margaret's journal? Emma shook her head. I'd only been there a few hours before you arrived. The journal was the only thing I discovered. There might be more. My mother once mentioned that James Hartwell kept detailed records of everyone they helped. Names, destinations, contacts, along the escape routes. Those records would be historically priceless. Or dangerous, Marcus added. Some of Vermont's most prominent families might have ancestors who weren't supposed to be in the country. Pinnacle could use that information as blackmail. Emma felt a chill. You think that's what they're after? Pinnacle's CEO, Harrison Pike, comes from old Vermont money, the senator explained. His family's fortune originated in the 1890s, supposedly from lumber. But there were always rumors about exploiting immigrant labor, about connections to human trafficking. If James Hartwell's records showed Pike's ancestors were involved in something illegal, they'd do anything to suppress that information. Emma finished. The senator nodded grimly. We need to search that house properly, find whatever's hidden there before Pinnacle does. They spent the day assembling a team. Historians, security personnel, and a structural engineer to ensure safe exploration of the condemned building. Emma found herself grateful for the senator's resources and connections, understanding for the first time the privilege that came with her newly discovered family ties. But privilege, she was learning, came with responsibility. That evening, she sat with Margaret's journal, reading entries that revealed the weight her ancestor had carried. James worries about the risks we take, Margaret had written, but how can we enjoy our comfort knowing others suffer? Our wealth means nothing if we don't use it to help those who have none. The house groans sometimes with all the secrets it holds, all the desperate souls who've passed through its hidden rooms. I tell James the sound isn't the wood settling, it's the weight of moral obligation pressing down on us all. A knock interrupted her reading. Marcus stood in the doorway, looking troubled. Uncle Bill's on a conference call with the preservation societies. Thought you should know. Pinnacle's made a new move. What kind of move? They've filed for emergency condemnation of the property, claiming it's a public safety hazard that needs immediate demolition. Emma's heart sank. Can they do that? They're trying. Mayor Bradley's called a town council meeting for tomorrow night. If they vote to support emergency demolition, we could lose the house before the federal protection kicks in. Emma closed the journal, anger replacing despair. Then I'll be at that meeting. Uncle Bill thought you might say that. He's arranging for the whole team to attend. Time to show Millbrook who's really behind Pinnacle's generous development offers. That night, Emma barely slept. She dreamed of Margaret Hartwell standing in the condemned house, surrounded by ghostly figures, all the people who had found sanctuary there. In the dream, Margaret spoke. The walls remember, Emma. Every person we saved, every family we protected. Don't let them tear down more than wood and stone. Don't let them erase the evidence of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. She woke with renewed determination. Pinnacle Enterprises thought they could intimidate a school teacher from Portland. They were about to learn what happened when you threatened a Hartwell. The next morning, Senator Thornfield's study buzzed with activity. Maps of the property covered his desk, marked with possible locations for hidden rooms or caches of documents. The historical team had been researching similar houses from the period, finding common patterns in hideaway construction. "The mill," said Dr. Janet Rodriguez, a historian from the University of Vermont. "Your journal mentions a tunnel to the old mill. That structure is still standing, isn't it?" Emma nodded. "Barely. It's on the eastern edge of the property, near the springs." Mills often had hidden spaces for storing grain or equipment. If James Hartwell connected the house to the mill underground, there might be a substantial hidden area we haven't found yet. The structural engineer, Paul Mason, studied the property surveys. The ground near the springs is limestone, easy to excavate, and natural caves might have been expanded, but we'd need to be extremely careful. Old tunnels can be death traps. Plans took shape for a systematic search the following day, assuming the town council didn't vote for immediate demolition. Emma found herself in the strange position of being both property owner and historical discovery, her very existence proof of the Hartwell family's hidden stories. That afternoon, she and Marcus drove back to Millbrook to prepare for the evening meeting. The town felt different now, smaller, more claustrophobic. People stared as they passed, word having spread about the Boston developer and the senator's interest in the old Hartwell place. They stopped at the Millbrook General Store for supplies. Ruth Jennings, the elderly proprietor, watched Emma with sharp eyes as she approached the counter. "You're the Hartley woman who bought the cursed house," Ruth said without preamble. "I didn't know it was cursed," Emma replied carefully. Ruth snorted. "Not cursed like ghosts and goblins, cursed with too much truth. My grandmother used to tell stories about that place, about the people who came through in the dead of night, seeking freedom, about the fine folks in town who didn't want certain truths exposed." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Bradley's great-grandfather was the bank president back then, foreclosed on immigrant families, then sold their land cheap to his friends. The Hartwells helped some of those families disappear before worse could happen. There's plenty in this town who'd rather keep the past buried." Is that why everyone's so eager to see it demolished? Fear makes people do foolish things, but greed's worse. Pinnacle's been spreading money around like fertilizer, making big promises about jobs and prosperity. People want to believe. Ruth's expression softened slightly. "Your people, the Hartwells, they were the conscience of this valley. Maybe it's fitting one of their own came back to stir things up again." As they left the store, Marcus glanced at Emma. Small towns have long memories. Apparently so. No wonder Mayor Bradley's so eager to support demolition. Can't have the truth about his family's past coming to light. Uncle Bill suspected as much. He's got researchers digging into several prominent Millbrook families. Not for blackmail, Marcus added quickly, but to understand the full scope of what we're fighting. The community center was already packed when they arrived for the town council meeting. Emma recognized some faces from her brief time in town. The real estate agent Harold Finch, looking uncomfortable. Dr. Sarah Chen, the veterinarian who'd stopped by the property to warn her about contaminated groundwater near the old dump site. Jake Morrison, the contractor who'd given her an honest assessment of the house's condition. Pinnacle's representatives clustered near the front, Robert Ashford among them. He caught Emma's eye and smiled coldly. Mayor Bradley sat at the council table, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with the crowd. Senator Thornfield arrived with his security detail and a team of lawyers and historians. His presence caused a stir. Former governors didn't usually attend small-town council meetings. He took a seat beside Emma, patting her hand reassuringly. "Remember," he whispered, "they're fighting dirty because they're scared. Truth has a way of surfacing, especially in old houses with hidden rooms." Mayor Bradley called the meeting to order, his voice strained. "We're here to discuss the emergency condemnation of the old Hartwell property. I'll remind everyone to keep comments civil and relevant." Robert Ashford stood first, smooth and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, Pinnacle Enterprises has Millbrook Valley's best interests at heart. The Hartwell property is a dangerous eyesore, a liability to the community. We're simply expediting its removal for public safety. Then he presented photographs of the house's worst deterioration, engineering reports emphasizing structural dangers, and estimates of cleanup costs that made several council members wince. Furthermore, Ashford continued, the current owner has no experience with historical restoration, no resources for proper renovation, and no viable plan for the property. Allowing this decay to continue while bureaucrats debate preservation is irresponsible. When he finished, Senator Thornfield rose. The room fell silent. I'm William Thornfield, and the Hartwell house was my family's home for generations. Yes, we changed our name, a decision I've come to regret. But that house represents something precious, not just to my family, but to American history. He gestured to the historians on his team. Dr. Rodriguez from UVM has documented over 300 people who found sanctuary in that house between 1850 and 1920. Escaped slaves, persecuted immigrants, women fleeing abuse, children rescued from factories. The Hartwells risked everything to help strangers in need. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked uncomfortable, others intrigued. Pinnacle Enterprises claims to care about this community's welfare, the senator continued. Yet they've systematically bought up historic properties across Vermont, demolished them, and built exclusive developments that price out local families. They're not interested in Millbrook's history, they're interested in its water rights. He produced documents of his own. The natural springs on the Hartwell property represent millions in potential profits for water bottling. That's what this is really about. Not public safety, corporate profit. Emma watched faces in the crowd shift as the senator spoke. Some nodded along, others frowned. Mayor Bradley looked increasingly agitated. When it came time for public comment, Ruth Jennings stood first. I've lived in this valley for 87 years. Watched it change, not always for the better. The Hartwell house might be falling down, but it's a reminder of when people in this valley stood for something more than property values. Jake Morrison, the contractor, spoke next. I examined that house. Yes, it needs work, but the bones are solid. With proper investment, it could be restored. Tearing it down would be wasteful and wrong. Others spoke for and against, the debate growing heated. Emma noticed Pinnacle's representatives taking notes, whispering among themselves. When her turn came, she stood on unsteady legs. My name is Emma Hartley. Until last week, I didn't know I was descended from the Hartwells. I bought this property because something called to me. Maybe ancestral memory, maybe just hope for a different life. What I found was a legacy I'm only beginning to understand. She held up Margaret's journal. My great-great-grandmother wrote about the burden of privilege, about the obligation to use whatever resources we have to help others. That house sheltered hundreds of desperate people. It stood for compassion over profit, courage over comfort. Her voice grew stronger. Pinnacle wants you to believe I'm just a naive school teacher in over my head. Maybe that's partly true, but I'm also a Hartwell, and Hartwells don't abandon their responsibilities. With Senator Thornfield's help and the support of preservation organizations, I will restore that house. It will again be a sanctuary, maybe not for fugitives, but for history, for truth, for the values that once made this community proud. The room erupted in applause from some, angry mutters from others. Mayor Bradley hammered his gavel repeatedly. Order! We'll take a brief recess before the vote. During the break, Ashford approached Emma. His pleasant mask had slipped. You're making a serious mistake, Miss Hartley. Or should I say Hartwell? Either way, you're playing with forces beyond your comprehension. Is that another threat? A prediction? Old houses burn easily. Accidents happen on construction sites. People with complicated pasts sometimes find their secrets exposed. His smile was sharp as glass. Think about your foster siblings. Their struggles are so public these days. Senator Thornfield materialized beside them. Mr. Ashford, I believe you just threatened my cousin in front of witnesses. I have excellent lawyers who'd love to discuss the legal implications of corporate intimidation. Ashford's face flushed. You're twisting my words, Senator. I'm merely pointing out the dangers of renovation work. Indeed, I'm sure the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division would be fascinated by your concern for safety. They're already quite interested in Pinnacle's activities across New England. Ashford retreated, but his expression promised trouble ahead. The senator guided Emma back to their seats. Well done, he said quietly. You're more like Margaret than you know. She had that same quiet fire when pushed. The council reconvened for the vote. Emma held her breath as each member declared their position. It came down to a single vote. Councilwoman Helen Price, an elderly woman who'd remained silent during the debate. This is difficult, she said slowly. I appreciate Pinnacle's investment in our community, but I remember my mother talking about the Hartwell house, about how her own grandmother found shelter there when she fled an abusive marriage in 1902. The law then said she had to stay with her husband. The Hartwells said different. She paused, looking directly at Emma. I vote against emergency demolition. The house deserves a chance, and so does its new owner. The room exploded in chaos. Pinnacle's representatives stormed out. Mayor Bradley's face turned purple, and supporters surrounded Emma with congratulations. She felt dizzy with relief and terror in equal measure. Outside, Ashford waited by his Mercedes. As Emma passed, he called out, "This isn't over, Miss Hartwell. You've won a vote, not the war. Pinnacle always gets what it wants, one way or another." Senator Thornfield stepped protectively closer to Emma. The only thing Pinnacle's getting is a federal investigation into its business practices. I'd advise you to preserve all your documents, Mr. Ashford. The authorities will want to see them. As they drove back to Burlington, Emma's hands finally stopped shaking. She'd won the first battle, but Ashford's threats echoed in her mind. Pinnacle wouldn't give up easily. What happens now? She asked the senator. Now we search that house properly, find whatever Pinnacle's so desperate to hide or destroy, and we do it fast before they try something more drastic than legal maneuvering. Emma nodded, thinking of Margaret's journal, of all the secrets still buried in the walls of her ancestral home. Tomorrow they would begin uncovering the truth. Tonight, she would sleep knowing she'd stood up to corporate bullies, just as her great-great-grandmother had stood up to different kinds of oppressors. The Hartwell legacy lived on, and Emma was beginning to understand what that truly meant. Not just property or bloodlines, but a tradition of choosing right over easy, of protecting the vulnerable, of using whatever power you had to make a difference. As Burlington's lights appeared ahead, she felt the weight of that legacy settling onto her shoulders. It was heavy, but not unbearable. After all, she was a Hartwell. And Hartwells, she was learning, were stronger than they looked. The morning, after the council meeting, dawned cold and bright, with frost silvering the grass around Senator Thornfield's Burlington home. Emma woke to find 17 missed calls on her phone, most from numbers she didn't recognize. The first voicemail made. Her blood run cold. Miss Hartley, this is Chief Brennan from the Millbrook Fire Department. There was an incident at your property last night. No structural damage, but you should come as soon as possible. She dressed quickly and found the senator already in his study, surrounded by legal documents and looking grim. I heard, he said before she could speak. Security reported smoke around 3 a.m. Someone tried to start a fire in the old summer kitchen, but the wood was too damp from recent rain. They fled when the patrol arrived. Ashford wasn't bluffing about the house burning easily. No, but he was sloppy. Security cameras caught a van leaving the scene, license plate traced to a company that contracts with Pinnacle for property maintenance. The senator's smile was sharp. My lawyers are having a field day with this. Attempted arson, trespassing, corporate conspiracy. Pinnacle just handed us ammunition. Within an hour, they were convoying to Millbrook with an expanded team. 2 state police cruisers led the way, followed by the senator's SUV, vehicles carrying historians and archaeologists, and a truck loaded with excavation equipment. Emma rode with Dr. Rodriguez, who briefed her on the search plan. Based on your journal and comparative studies of underground railroad sites, we believe there's a complex network of tunnels connecting the house, the mill, and possibly other structures. The limestone geology would have made excavation relatively easy. Why didn't anyone find these during previous surveys? They weren't looking, and the Hartwells were clever. Many of these hiding places were designed to be invisible, even to determine searchers. We're bringing ground-penetrating radar to map subsurface anomalies. The Hartwell property looked different in daylight, with official vehicles lining the drive. Yellow tape marked the attempted arson site, and state investigators were documenting evidence. Chief Brennan, a weathered man in his 60s, met them at the door. Lucky that wood was wet, he said, showing them the scorched summer kitchen. Professional job otherwise. Accelerant placed strategically, multiple ignition points. If it had caught properly, the whole place would have gone up in minutes. Emma stared at the blackened stones, imagining flames consuming Margaret's journal. The portraits, all evidence of the Hartwell legacy. Anger burned in her chest, hot and clarifying. Can we prove Pinnacle ordered this? Working on it, Chief Brennan replied. But these corporate types use cutouts, third parties. Hard to trace. Back to the source. Senator Thornfield's phone rang. He stepped aside to answer, his expression darkening as he listened. When he returned, his face was stone. That was my contact at the FBI. Harrison Pike, Pinnacle's CEO, just filed an injunction claiming the Hartwell property contains documents that could damage his family's reputation through spurious historical allegations. He's arguing that as descendants of prominent Vermont citizens, they have a right to prevent defamation of their ancestors. Can he do that? Emma asked, incredulous. He's trying. It's a delaying tactic, but it means we need to find whatever's hidden here fast, before some judge decides Pike has a legitimate interest in suppressing historical documents. The search began immediately. The archaeology team set up a grid system, while ground-penetrating radar operators began systematic sweeps. Emma joined Dr. Rodriguez in the house, using Margaret's journal as a guide. She mentions the Blue Room several times. The historian noted, "That's not a standard Victorian term. It might be code." They found it in the basement, a section of wall painted faded blue behind stacks of rotting lumber. When they cleared the debris, Emma noticed the mortar between stones looked different. Dr. Rodriguez ran her fingers along the joints. This was redone, more recently than the original construction. She produced a small hammer and chisel. Emma nodded. With careful taps, the historian loosened what proved to be a false section of wall. Behind it, a narrow passage extended into darkness. Emma's flashlight revealed wooden steps descending at a steep angle. Classic hidey hole construction, Dr. Rodriguez breathed. But more elaborate than most, this goes deeper than a simple hiding space. They called for the structural engineer to confirm safety, then descended carefully. The passage opened into a small underground room, perfectly dry and surprisingly well preserved. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound ledgers, boxes of documents, and what looked like photographic plates. Emma reached for the nearest ledger with trembling hands. The first page bore James Hartwell's precise handwriting. Record of Sanctuary Seekers, 1851-1889. May God forgive us for the laws we break in service of humanity. What followed was meticulous documentation of every person the Hartwells had helped. Names, origins, destinations, the circumstances that drove them to seek sanctuary. Some entries included photographs, an early use of the technology to document identity. "This is incredible," Dr. Rodriguez whispered. "It's a complete record of an underground railroad station's activities. Museums would kill for this." But as Emma read deeper, she understood why Pinnacle wanted these documents destroyed. The ledgers didn't just list those seeking help, they documented those who had oppressed them, factory owners using child labor, politicians who'd campaigned on anti-immigrant platforms while secretly employing undocumented workers, prominent citizens who'd participated in human trafficking. "Look at this," Emma said, showing an entry from 1887. Harrison Pike's great-great-grandfather, Cornelius Pike. He ran a lumber operation using what amounted to slave labor, immigrants trapped in debt bondage. The Hartwells helped 17 of his workers escape. Dr. Rodriguez photographed pages rapidly. "No wonder Pike wants this suppressed. This documents systematic exploitation by some of Vermont's most respected families." A shout from above interrupted them. They climbed back to find the radar team, excited about their discoveries. The equipment had revealed an extensive tunnel system connecting multiple structures across the property. "It's like a spider web," the lead technician explained, showing the radar images. "The main house connects to at least 6 other locations. The mill is just one terminus. There are chambers under the old barn, the spring house, even what looks like a natural cave system near the water source." Senator Thornfield studied the images with growing amazement. The Hartwells created an entire underground network. People could move between buildings without being seen, hide in multiple locations if one was compromised. "There's more," the technician added. "Some of these tunnels extend beyond the property line. They might connect to other houses in the valley." As the team planned excavation priorities, Emma's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered, stepping away from the group. "Miss Hartwell." She recognized Harrison Pike's voice. Immediately, cultured, cold, and angry. "I understand you're conducting unauthorized archaeological work on your property. It's my property. I don't need authorization to explore it." "You do when it involves defamatory historical fabrications about respected Vermont families. I'm warning you, cease this excavation immediately. Or what? You'll try to burn my house down again?" Silence. "Then, I don't know what you're talking about, but I do know that financial records can be very revealing. Your foster brother David's rehab facility, for instance. Did you know they're facing an audit? Unfortunate timing, given his progress." Emma's free hand clenched. "If you harm my brother, no one's harming anyone. I'm simply pointing out how interconnected things are. Your brother's treatment, your teaching position in Portland, the various legal troubles of your other foster siblings. So many vulnerabilities when one chooses to wage war against established interests." The line went dead. Emma stood shaking with rage until Senator Thornfield noticed her distress. She related the conversation, watching his expression harden. "Pike's panicking," he said. "Making direct threats means he's desperate. I'll call the FBI, get protection assigned to your family members, and I have friends on the boards of several rehab facilities. David won't lose his placement." The excavation continued despite Pike's threats. By afternoon, they'd opened the tunnel to the mill, revealing a chamber carved into limestone that took everyone's breath away. The natural cave had been expanded into a substantial shelter, complete with sleeping platforms, a freshwater spring, and carved niches holding supplies that had waited over a century. "This could house 20 people comfortably," marveled Paul Mason, the engineer. "Maybe more in emergency. And look at the ventilation system. Quite sophisticated for the era." They found more documents here, including correspondence between the Hartwells and other underground railroad conductors. Maps showed the full network, revealing that Millbrook Valley had been a major hub for the freedom movement. Your ancestors were remarkable people, Dr. Rodriguez told Emma as they catalogued discoveries. This wasn't just about helping a few individuals. They created an entire alternative infrastructure for human dignity. As the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the valley, a commotion arose from the direction of the main road. A convoy of expensive vehicles wound up the drive, led by a limousine with Massachusetts plates. Emma recognized several Pinnacle board members emerging, but it was the older man who stepped from the limo who commanded attention. Harrison Pike was 75, silver-haired and distinguished, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Emma's monthly salary. He surveyed the archaeological operation with obvious displeasure before approaching the senator. "William, this has gone far enough." "Harrison." The senator's voice was cordial but firm. "I didn't expect a personal visit. You're encouraging this woman's delusions, these fabricated documents, this manufactured history. It's character assassination of the worst kind." Emma stepped forward. "The documents aren't fabricated. Your ancestor enslaved workers. Mine helped them escape. That's historical fact." Pike's gaze fixed on her with reptilian coldness. "You're nothing but an opportunist, latching onto the Thornfield name for advantage. Do you really think a school teacher from nowhere can stand against interests that shape this entire region?" "I think the truth has its own power," Emma replied evenly, "and I think you're afraid of what else we'll find." Pike's composed facade cracked slightly. "You have no idea what you're meddling with. The economic foundations of this entire state rest on reputations and relationships built over generations. Destroying that serves no one." Senator Thornfield moved beside Emma. "The only thing being destroyed is the mythology that wealth equals virtue. The Hartwells knew better. They used their privilege to help others, not exploit them." "Naive. Idealism," Pike spat. "The real world runs on pragmatism, not fairy tales about noble ancestors." "Then why are you so desperate to suppress these fairy tales?" Emma asked. Pike's face flushed. He turned to his entourage. "Document everything. If this archaeological vandalism continues, we'll pursue every legal remedy available." As the Pinnacle convoy retreated, Emma noticed more vehicles approaching, but these were different. Pickup trucks and older sedans, the vehicles of Millbrook locals. Ruth Jennings led the group, carrying what looked like a large photo album. "Heard there was excitement up here," she announced. "Figured you might want to see this." She opened the album to reveal old photographs of the valley. "My family's pictures, going back to the 1890s, thought they might help with your historical documentation." Other residents had brought their own family records, diaries, letters, photographs. Jake Morrison carried a wooden box. "This was in my grandmother's attic," he explained. "Letters from her mother, who worked as a maid for the Pikes back in the day. Interesting reading about how they treated their employees." Dr. Rodriguez's eyes lit up. "This is extraordinary. Primary source documentation from multiple perspectives." As the community members shared their archives, a picture emerged of Millbrook Valley's complex past. The Hartwells hadn't worked alone. Many local families had participated in the sanctuary network, risking their own safety to help others. "My great-grandfather was the town blacksmith," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the veterinarian. "He made special shoes for horses, ones that left tracks pointing the opposite direction. Helped confused anyone tracking fugitives." Helen Price, the councilwoman who'd cast the deciding vote, approached Emma. "I brought something else," she said quietly, producing a small leather pouch. "This was passed down through our family. We were told to give it to a Hartwell if one ever returned to the valley." Inside the pouch was an ornate key and a note, in faded ink. "For the heart of the house, M.H." Emma recognized Margaret's initials. The heart of the house. That's all we knew. My grandmother said Margaret Hartwell gave this to her mother for safekeeping, said someday a descendant would need it. As darkness fell, the property transformed into an archaeological wonderland. Work lights illuminated excavation sites while historians huddled over documents and community members shared generational stories. Despite the earlier confrontation with Pike, there was an atmosphere of celebration, a community rediscovering its hidden heroes. Senator Thornfield pulled Emma aside. Pike's visit wasn't just about intimidation. He's scared, which means there's something here even more damaging than what we've found. The key Helen gave me, what do you think it opens? Duchine. In Victorian architecture, the heart of the house usually meant the hearth room, the kitchen or main fireplace, but Margaret was clever. It might be metaphorical. They returned to the house, studying the main fireplace in the formal parlor. The massive stone structure dominated the room, but nothing seemed unusual until Emma noticed a pattern in the stonework. A subtle heart shape formed by the arrangement of darker stones. She pressed the center stone. Nothing. Tried the key in. Various crevices. Still nothing. Then she remembered something from the journal. Margaret wrote about teaching the children to find truth in reflection. There's a mirror above the mantel. The mirror, age-spotted and cloudy, reflected the room behind them. But when Emma held the key up to it, she noticed something odd. The reflection showed a keyhole that wasn't visible on the actual wall. It's a hidden panel, she breathed, concealed behind what looks like solid stone. They felt along the wall until they found the concealed edges. The key turned smoothly, in a lock invisible to the naked eye. A section of stone swung inward, revealing a space carved directly into the chimney structure. Inside sat a metal strongbox and several leather portfolios. Emma opened the box with shaking hands. It contained more photographs, these showing some of Vermont's most prominent citizens in compromising situations, participating in Klan rallies, signing documents authorizing child labor, posing with known criminals. But it was the portfolios that made the senator whistle low. They contained what appeared to be government documents from the 1920s and 1930s, evidence of a conspiracy among wealthy Vermont families to maintain their power through illegal means. Bribery, election fraud, violent suppression of labor organizing. Pike's grandfather's signature is all over these, the senator noted, along with judges, state legislators, police officials. This is evidence of systematic corruption at the highest levels. Emma found a letter in Margaret's handwriting. To my descendants who find this, power protects power unless truth intervenes. These documents are insurance against those who would silence history. Use them wisely, use them justly, but use them if you must. A sound from outside interrupted them. Vehicles approaching fast. Sirens wailing. Through the window, they saw police cars surrounding the house, officers emerging with weapons drawn. Chief Brennan entered, looking apologetic but determined. Sorry, folks, Judge Harriman just issued an emergency order. All excavation must cease immediately pending review of Mr. Pike's injunction. I'm ordered to secure all discovered materials as potential evidence. Senator Thornfield stepped forward. On what grounds? Potential theft of private documents. Mr. Pike claims anything found here belongs to descendant families mentioned within. It was a brilliant legal maneuver. Use the court system to seize the evidence before it could be properly documented or shared. Emma clutched the portfolios, understanding their importance. These documents prove criminal conspiracy. They can't be private property. Ma'am, I need you to turn those over. Judge's orders. The senator put a hand on Emma's shoulder. Do as he says. For now, but Chief, I want a full chain of custody documentation, every item catalogued, every page counted. My lawyers will be filing counter motions within the hour. As police began boxing up discoveries, Emma felt rage and despair warring within her. They'd found proof of historical injustices and modern cover-ups, only to have it seized by the very system the criminals had corrupted. Dr. Rodriguez whispered urgently to the senator, who nodded and made a quick phone call. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral. The good doctor reminds me that academic institutions have certain protocols for protecting historical materials. Everything's been photographed and backed up to secure university servers. Pike can seize the originals, but he can't stuff the digital genie back in the bottle. Chief Brennan, overhearing, looked relieved. Didn't hear that, Senator, officially, but glad to know proper procedures were followed. As the last boxes were loaded into police vehicles, Harrison Pike arrived, striding through the chaos with vindictive satisfaction. He approached Emma, who stood with the senator on the porch. "You should have sold when you had the chance," he said quietly. "Now you'll lose everything. The house, your teaching job, probably your freedom once we prove you've been trafficking in stolen documents." "Stolen from whom?" Emma shot back. "The dead? The descendants of people your family exploited?" Pike's smile was winter cold. "From the proper heirs of those named individuals. Vermont has laws about found property, about historical artifacts. You're not equipped to navigate this, Miss Hartley. You're just a teacher who stumbled into something too big to understand." Senator Thornfield intervened. "She understands perfectly, and she's not alone. I've already contacted the Vermont Historical Society, the ACLU, and several federal agencies interested in civil rights violations. This isn't ending, Harrison. It's just beginning." Pike's composure finally shattered. "You sanctimonious fool! Do you think your political career survives this? Do you think the party forgives you for attacking its biggest donors? You're destroying yourself for nothing." "I'm honoring my ancestors' true legacy," the senator replied calmly, "something you might consider trying." As Pike stormed off, Emma felt exhaustion crash over her. The day's revelations, the threats against her family, the seizure of evidence, it was overwhelming. But as she looked around at the community members still present, at the historians documenting everything despite police interference, at the work lights illuminating her ancestral home, she felt something else too. Pride. The same pride Margaret must have felt, defying unjust laws to help desperate people. The pride of standing for something larger than personal safety or comfort. "What happens now?" she asked the senator. "Now we fight. In the courts, in the media, in the arena of public opinion." Pike made a critical error. He showed his hand too clearly. Attempted arson, direct threats, using corrupt judges for illegal seizures. He's given us everything we need to expose not just historical crimes, but ongoing ones. Marcus appeared from the house carrying a laptop. "Uncle Bill, you need to see this. The photos Dr. Rodriguez uploaded are already going viral. 3 major news outlets want interviews. The hashtag #GHartwellLegacy is trending." Emma looked at the screen, seeing images of the underground chambers, the historical documents, the evidence of Pike family crimes spreading across social media. The modern world had tools Margaret Hartwell couldn't have imagined. "Pike's about to learn that some secrets can't be buried anymore," Marcus continued. "Not in the digital age. Every document they seized has been preserved online. Every threat he made has been recorded. Every corrupt official he's used has left a digital trail." As the police vehicles disappeared down the drive, Emma stood on her ancestors' porch, surrounded by allies she hadn't known existed a week ago. The house still stood, damaged but defiant. The truth had been unearthed, even if temporarily seized. And the fight for justice, the same fight the Hartwells had, waged for generations, continued with new tools and new warriors. The sun had set completely now, but work lights still blazed across the property. There was more to discover, more secrets to unearth, more truth to preserve. Emma thought of her students in Portland, how she'd always taught them that one person could make a difference. Now she understood that making a difference often meant accepting that powerful people would try to destroy you. But it also meant discovering that you weren't really just one person. You were part of a legacy, a community, a movement that stretched across time. As she walked back into the house, her family's sanctuary, Emma Hartley knew the real fight was just beginning. But she also knew she was ready for it. After all, she was a Hartwell, and Hartwells had been fighting this kind of battle for over a century. They hadn't given up then. She wouldn't give up now. The heart of the house beat strong. Its secrets revealed, but its purpose unchanged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new battles. But tonight, surrounded by the ghosts of brave ancestors and the support of living allies, Emma felt the power of truth like a flame that no amount of corporate water could extinguish. The Hartwell legacy lived on, and its next chapter was just beginning. The news broke at dawn. Emma woke to her phone buzzing incessantly, messages flooding in from numbers she didn't recognize. The first coherent text came from Marcus. "Turn. On Channel 9, now." She stumbled downstairs in Senator Thornfield's guest room to find him already in his study, watching multiple news feeds on different screens. The headlines were explosive. Vermont Dynasty's dark secrets revealed, Underground Railroad documents expose historic crimes, Pinnacle CEO under federal investigation. Harrison Pike miscalculated, the senator said without turning around. The judge who issued last night's seizure order? Turns out he's been receiving campaign contributions from Pinnacle subsidiaries for years. The FBI was already investigating him for unrelated corruption. Our case just gave them the smoking gun. On screen, federal agents were leading Judge Harriman away in handcuffs. Another feed showed Pinnacle's headquarters surrounded by news vans and protesters. But it was the third screen that made Emma's heart skip. Her own face, beside historical photos of Margaret Hartwell with the caption, "Descendant unearths family's heroic legacy." Dr. Rodriguez's university held a press conference at midnight, the senator explained. She presented all the photographed documents before Pike could claim they were fabricated. The Historical Society authenticated them within hours. Every major news outlet picked it up. Emma sank into a chair, overwhelmed. What about the seized documents? Federal marshals took custody from local police an hour ago. The Attorney General's office is treating this as evidence in a racketeering investigation. Pike's attempt to suppress the documents just turned a historical discovery into a modern criminal case. The phone rang. Senator Thornfield answered, his expression growing grimmer as he listened. He hung up and turned to Emma. That was the Burlington police chief. They've arrested 2 men attempting to break into your apartment in Portland. Professional thieves with ties to private security firms Pinnacle uses. Emma thought of her modest apartment, her teaching materials, the few personal possessions she valued. There's nothing there worth stealing. They weren't after valuables. They were looking for leverage, anything to discredit you. Pike's getting desperate. Another call came, this time for Emma. She recognized David's voice immediately. Em, you need to see the news. Some corporate bigwig just held a press conference claiming you're a fraud, that you're not really related to the Hartwells. He says he has documents proving the whole thing is an elaborate hoax. Emma looked at the senator, who was already pulling up the live stream. Harrison Pike stood before a podium at the Pinnacle offices, looking haggard but determined. Carefully orchestrated deception, he was saying. Miss Hartley is nothing more than an opportunist who has manipulated a senile politician into believing she's his long-lost relative. We have genealogical experts who will testify that the Hartwell bloodline ended decades ago. The senator snorted. Genealogical experts. He means paid consultants who'll say whatever he wants. He picked up his phone. Time to call in our own experts. Within hours, the media battlefield was fully engaged. Pike's experts presented convoluted arguments about broken documentation chains and questionable birth records. In response, 3 independent genealogists confirmed Emma's connection to the Hartwells through DNA analysis the senator had quietly arranged days earlier. "Your mother Rose was definitely Margaret Hartwell's great-great-granddaughter," Dr. Patricia Morrow from Harvard explained on national television. "The genetic markers are unmistakable. Additionally, we've located birth records from a small hospital in New Hampshire that confirm Rose Hartwell gave birth to a daughter named Emma in 1990. The battle shifted to the historical documents. Pike's lawyers argued they were elaborate forgeries, part of what they called the Thornfield political machine's attempt to destroy legitimate Vermont businesses. But as more historians examined the evidence, their authenticity became undeniable. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. An elderly woman named Catherine Pike, Harrison's own aunt, called a press conference. "I'm 93 years old," she began, her voice strong despite her age. "Too old to care about family loyalty over truth. My father told me stories about his grandfather Cornelius, stories the family tried to bury. Everything in those Hartwell documents is true. Cornelius did use indentured servants. He did participate in human trafficking. The family fortune was built on exploitation." She held up a photograph. "This is Cornelius Pike with 2 Vermont state senators and a judge, taken in 1889. The same men named in the Hartwell documents as co-conspirators in keeping immigrant workers enslaved. I've kept this hidden for 70 years, no more." The revelation sent shockwaves through Vermont's establishment. Other descendants of prominent families began coming forward, some to defend their ancestors, others to acknowledge painful truths. The State Historical Society announced a comprehensive review of the period's labor practices. Meanwhile, Emma returned to the Hartwell property with a federal security detail. The house looked different now, not just as her impulsive purchase, or even her ancestral home, but as ground zero in a battle over historical truth and modern justice. Marcus met her at the door. Uncle Bill's inside with the preservation team. They've found something else. In the library, workers had discovered another hidden compartment, this one behind a section of built-in bookshelves. Inside were more journals, not Margaret's this time, but James Hartwell's personal diaries. "Listen to this," the senator said, reading from a leather-bound volume. "October 15th, 1888. Tonight we moved 13 souls through the tunnels. Among them, a young woman named Maria who escaped from Cornelius Pike's lumber camp. She bears scars from beatings and worse. I have documented her testimony and secured sworn statements from 2 witnesses. If Pike's cruelty ever comes to light, this evidence will damn him." The diary went on to detail a systematic effort to document abuses by Vermont's elite, creating what James called an archive of accountability. He was building legal cases, Emma realized. They weren't just helping people escape, they were collecting evidence for future justice. "Smart man," the senator agreed. He knew the political climate would eventually change, that someday these crimes could be prosecuted. He was playing a long game. That evening brought more dramatic developments. The FBI raided Pinnacle's offices, seizing computers and files. Several board members resigned. Stock prices plummeted, but Harrison Pike remained defiant, hiring the most expensive law firm in New England and vowing to fight this orchestrated character assassination. Emma stood in Margaret's study, looking at the portrait of her ancestor. The painted eyes seemed to hold a question. What are you going to do with this legacy? Her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. Miss Hartley? This is Rebecca Martinez from the New York Times. We'd like to offer you a platform to tell your story, the real story behind these discoveries. Not just the historical crimes, but what this means for understanding American history and contemporary social justice. Emma hesitated. She was a private person, a teacher who preferred classrooms to spotlights. But she thought of her students, of the lessons she'd always tried to impart about standing up for truth. "I'll do it," she said, "but I want to talk about more than just my family. I want to discuss how communities can confront their difficult histories and why that matters for moving forward." The interview, published 3 days later, became a sensation. Emma spoke eloquently about discovering her heritage, about the moral courage required to help others at personal risk, about how the past echoes in present injustices. She called for a truth and reconciliation approach to historical wrongs. The response was overwhelming. Schools requested she speak to students. Historical societies wanted her expertise. Publishers offered book deals, but it was a different call that changed everything. This is Director Sarah Chen from the National Museum of American History. We'd like to create a permanent exhibition about the Hartwell Sanctuary Network. Would you consider donating some artifacts and serving as a consultant? Emma looked around the house that had started this journey. It belonged in private hands less than ever. An idea began forming. That night, she presented her vision to Senator Thornfield and the preservation team. The Hartwell House would become more than a museum. It would be a living center for social justice education, a place where students could learn about historical resistance movements and connect them to contemporary issues. The tunnels, the hidden rooms, we'll restore them all, she explained. But we'll also create modern classrooms, research facilities, spaces for community organizing. The Hartwell tradition wasn't about preserving the past. It was about fighting injustice in the present. The senator smiled. Margaret would have loved this. James, too. They didn't want monuments. They wanted their work to continue. As plans developed, the legal battles intensified. Pike's arrest for conspiracy to commit arson was just the beginning. Federal prosecutors uncovered a web of corruption extending back decades. Several prominent Vermonters faced charges for bribery, fraud, and civil rights violations. But the real victory came from an unexpected source. Workers renovating the mill discovered a final cache of documents, correspondence between the Hartwells and Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and other abolition leaders. The letters revealed the Hartwell Sanctuary as a crucial node in a national network of resistance. One letter from Douglass was particularly powerful. The Hartwell Station represents the best of American ideals, citizens risking everything to correct their nation's gravest moral failing. Their work reminds us that patriotism means fighting to make your country worthy of its highest principles. When these documents became public, even Pike's supporters began abandoning him. The evidence was overwhelming. The Hartwells hadn't been radicals or lawbreakers. They'd been patriots in the truest sense, working to redeem American democracy from its foundational hypocrisies. 6 months later, Emma stood before a crowd of thousands at the official opening of the Hartwell Center for Social Justice. The same house had been beautifully restored, its Victorian grandeur now serving an educational mission. The tunnels had been reinforced and lit, allowing visitors to experience the escape routes. Modern buildings housed classrooms, archives, and meeting spaces. Senator Thornfield introduced her to sustained applause. Emma approached the podium, thinking of how far she'd come from that impulsive property purchase. In the crowd, she saw familiar faces, Ruth Jennings and other Millbrook residents who'd supported her, Dr. Rodriguez and the historians who'd validated the discoveries, even Catherine Pike, Harrison's aunt, who'd become an unlikely ally. The Hartwell legacy isn't about my family or any single family, Emma began. It's about ordinary people making extraordinary moral choices. Margaret and James Hartwell weren't saints or superheroes. They were citizens who saw injustice and decided to act, despite the personal costs. She gestured to the restored house behind her. This center will honor their memory not through static displays, but through active engagement with contemporary justice issues. We'll train young activists, host difficult community conversations, and provide resources for those fighting modern forms of oppression. The crowd erupted in applause. Emma waited for quiet before continuing. I want to address something directly. Some have criticized this project as an attack on Vermont's heritage, an attempt to tear down respected families and institutions. But confronting historical wrongs isn't about destroying heritage, it's about making it honest. The Pike family wealth came from exploitation. Acknowledging that doesn't erase their descendants' accomplishments, but it does obligate us to repair the damage. She paused, seeing nods throughout the crowd. That's why I'm announcing the Hartwell Reparations Fund. Pinnacle Enterprises, under court order, will pay substantial restitution. These funds will support descendants of those exploited by the Pike lumber operations and other documented abuses. It's a small step toward justice, but it's a start. The announcement made national headlines. The Reparations Fund became a model for other communities grappling with historical injustices. Harrison Pike, now facing federal charges, watched his empire crumble as investors fled and prosecutors closed in. But Emma's focus had shifted from fighting Pike to building something positive. The center's first program brought together school students from across New England to study historical resistance movements. They explored the tunnels, read primary documents, and discussed how past struggles informed present activism. Miss Hartley, one student asked during a workshop, how did you find the courage to stand up to such powerful people? Emma thought of that stormy night when she'd first arrived at the house, of Margaret's journal, of discovering her own connection to this legacy. I realized I wasn't really standing alone, she answered. I had the examples of my ancestors, the support of the community, and the power of truth. When you're fighting for justice, you're never really alone. The arc of history bends toward justice, but only when people have the courage to bend it. The seasons turned. The center flourished, hosting conferences on criminal justice reform, immigration rights, and economic equality. Scholars researched in the archives. Activists planned campaigns in the meeting rooms. Students learned that history wasn't just about the past, but about understanding how to shape the future. Emma divided her time between directing the center and teaching. She'd return to her classroom in Portland part-time, bringing the lessons of the Hartwell legacy to new generations. Her students now studied local history with fresh eyes, looking for untold stories in their own communities. One autumn day, as leaves blazed across Millbrook Valley in their annual display, Emma received a letter. The return address was a federal prison where Harrison Pike served his sentence for conspiracy and fraud. She almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Miss Hartley, Pike had written, I've had considerable time to reflect on my actions and the history we fought over. I was wrong, not just legally, but morally. The documents you uncovered forced me to confront truths about my family I'd always suspected, but never wanted to acknowledge. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that your courage in revealing these truths has changed more than just public perception. It's changed me. I've instructed my lawyers to cooperate fully with the Reparations Fund and to donate my remaining personal assets to the center. It's insufficient atonement, but it's what I can offer. Emma set the letter aside, feeling an unexpected mix of emotions. She'd never sought to destroy Pike personally, only to prevent him from suppressing truth and continuing exploitation. His apparent transformation felt like another kind of victory, proof that confronting historical wrongs could lead to personal redemption, not just institutional change. That evening, she walked through the center's grounds as the sun set behind. The mountains. The old mill housed an exhibition on labor history. The renovated barn served as a community meeting space. The spring that Pike had wanted to commercialize now fed a public garden where local schools grew vegetables for food banks. At the main house, she climbed to Margaret's study. The portrait still hung there, but now it was surrounded by photos of center programs, letters from visitors, artwork by students who'd learned about courage from the Hartwell story. Emma opened Margaret's journal to a passage she'd marked. Future generations may judge our methods, question our choices, wonder at our risks. But I pray they understand this. In times of moral crisis, neutrality is complicity. We could not save everyone, but we saved who we could. We could not change every unjust law, but we challenged what we could. Our house became a sanctuary because we chose compassion over comfort, justice over safety. May others make the same choice when their time comes. Emma closed the journal and looked out at the valley she now called home. Lights twinkled in the distance, some from old farmhouses, like the one she stood in, others from new homes built by families drawn to Millbrook's revitalized community. The valley had transformed, not through corporate development, but through reconnection with its moral heritage. Her phone buzzed with a message from David, now counseling others in recovery. Saw the news about the center's expansion grant. Mom, would be proud. You found our real family and made it matter. Emma smiled, thinking of Rose, the mother she'd never really known. The Hartwell line hadn't ended with Rose's struggles or Emma's adoption. It continued through the work of the center, through every student who learned about courage, through every activist who found inspiration in Margaret and James's example. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus Thornfield stood there with a smile. The Portland School Board called. They want to implement your justice education curriculum district-wide, and 3 more communities have requested help establishing their own truth and reconciliation processes. Thought you'd want to know. Emma nodded, unsurprised. The ripples from that first stone, her impulsive decision to buy a condemned house, continued, spreading. Each revelation had sparked others. Each act of courage had inspired more. Oh, and Uncle Bill asked me to tell you, the Senate committee approved his American Sanctuaries Act. Federal funding for historical sites that served as refuges throughout American history. The Hartwell Center will be the flagship program. As Marcus left, Emma returned to the window. The mist was rising from the valley, dancing between the hills like ghosts of all those who'd passed through these mountains seeking freedom. She thought of the unnamed souls who'd hidden in the tunnels below, whose stories would never be fully known, but whose courage had paved the way for others. The house creaked gently around her, not with age or decay, but with life. Footsteps of visitors exploring the museum, voices of students debating in classrooms, laughter from the community garden. The Hartwell house was fulfilling its purpose. Once again, offering sanctuary not from physical danger, but from historical amnesia and contemporary injustice. Emma picked up her phone to check messages and found one from a historian in Georgia. Inspired by the Hartwell Center, we've discovered a similar sanctuary network here. Would you consult on establishing our own center? She smiled, already imagining the possibilities. The Hartwell model could spread nationwide. Communities confronting their difficult histories, transforming sites of past courage into centers for contemporary justice work. As darkness settled over Millbrook Valley, lights glowed warmly in the center's windows. Emma made her way downstairs, where evening programs were beginning. In the main hall, a group of immigrant rights activists were planning a campaign. In the library, students researched connections between historical and modern labor exploitation. In the kitchen, Margaret's kitchen, volunteers prepared meals for the homeless, continuing the tradition of feeding those in need. Emma paused. In the entrance hall where she'd first discovered her heritage, the portraits still watched from the walls, but now they seemed less like stern ancestors and more like encouraging guides. She touched the frame of Margaret's portrait gently. "We're still doing the work," she whispered. "Different challenges, same principles. The sanctuary continues." Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, blanketing the valley. In pristine white, but beneath that pure surface lay complex truths, tunnels that had sheltered the desperate, documents that revealed hard realities, stories that challenged comfortable myths. Emma stepped onto the porch, watching the snow transform. The landscape. A year ago, she'd been a teacher living paycheck to paycheck, rootless and searching for purpose. Now she stood as guardian of a legacy that stretched back generations and forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. Cars arrived for the evening's programs, their headlights cutting through the snowy darkness. People hurried inside, eager to engage with history and its lessons. Emma greeted them warmly, these pilgrims to a place where truth had conquered power, where courage had outlasted corruption, where an ordinary woman's impulsive decision had uncovered extraordinary stories. The Hartwell Center for Social Justice stood strong against the winter night, its lights beaming across the valley like beacons. Inside, the work continued, teaching, learning, organizing, remembering. The same work Margaret and James had begun, in secret now flourished openly, proof that justice delayed need not be justice denied. Emma remained on the porch a moment longer, breathing the cold mountain air. Somewhere in the darkness, she felt the presence of all those who'd passed this way, fugitives and helpers, oppressed and liberators, her own unknown mother and all the unnamed heroes whose stories would never be fully told. "Thank you," she said quietly, to the night, to the house, to the legacy she'd inherited and transformed. Then she turned and walked inside, ready to continue the work. The Hartwell Sanctuary endured, its mission evolved but undiminished, and Emma Hartley, teacher, descendant, guardian of truth, took her place in the long line of those who chose. Justice over comfort, community over isolation, courage over fear. The story that had begun with an impulsive property purchase had become something far greater, a testament to the power of uncovered truth and the endurance of human dignity. In the end, the Hartwell legacy wasn't about bloodlines or buildings. It was about the choice each generation made to stand for justice, to offer sanctuary, to bend the arc of history toward its better angels. As snow continued falling over Millbrook Valley, the center's lights glowed steadily through the storm, a beacon of hope in dark times, a reminder that ordinary people doing extraordinary things could change the world, one act of courage at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.